Hello, everyone. I am Adam with D&D Beyond, and I am here with a special guest for today's development update and community Q&A session. We are also going to do a special segment that we're calling Tech Talk. I was just trolling everyone with the Tech Talk or whatever the bad joke was last week, but we're going to do some Tech Talk this week with Mr. I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Hey everybody, Dave Hartless, Chief Architect for D&D Beyond. Happy to be here today. Happy to talk a little bit about the technical infrastructure and our implementations for this wonderful site that everybody loves.
Yes, everybody loves it. I like how he put that part in there. I'm actually starting on the wrong slide here, so we're going to fix that real quick. All right, here we go. So today's lineup, I will go through very quickly today. The spotlight is on the tech talk part of this because this is something that I've seen several of you out there who might be engineers or developers or just interested, want to know a lot of this information. So we're going to leave as much time as we can for that. So I'm going to run through latest updates upcoming. Then we're going to get into tech talk. And then at that point, it's going to be ask us anything. So you can ask me questions at any point. You don't necessarily have to designate who the question is for, but type question in front of it in chat, and our magical thing will pick up the questions. But this is also your opportunity to ask very technical questions that I am not always going to be able to answer because Dave will be here and he will be able to chime in during the question time as well. So jump right in to latest updates. Class feature variants, as we've talked about, I mainly am calling that out today because it is something that we are working through and we're waiting on some of the character sheet framework changes that I've been talking about for the last few weeks to be fully in place. So we have rolled that out internally. We've gotten up to 5% of our anonymous traffic, which is a pretty large sample size here as well. We are 90% with subscribers right now. So if you're a subscriber, you probably have the new character sheet. We actually rolled that up to 100%, but this is the reason that we test. We ran into a couple of little hiccups that we're trying to iron out because of quarantine and the stay-at-home orders, shelter-in-place orders that are present globally at this point in time. Our traffic and the amount of users who are coming to D&D Beyond has just skyrocketed. It has tripled for the most part. And so as this is going on, we are trying to take the utmost care to make sure that we have maximum uptime for all of the services because we know a lot of people are playing games during this time. And I think it's a great thing to do while we're all stuck here, at home, is to play those games. But we're trying to be as cautious as we can where we don't interrupt your Saturday night game session. But we're almost there with all of the subscribers. And once we get there and we feel comfortable that everything is stable, this is where you're going to start to see some other exciting elements happen. So on the player mobile app, with everything that is going on there, you've signed up for the app. Some of those invites have started going out. So as I said, we're up to about 90% subscribers, I think, at this point. Some of the invites for the alpha have started going out, and those will go out over time. If you haven't gotten yours yet, definitely keep your eyes peeled. But the alpha with the character sheet in it as a starting point is starting to roll out to subscribers. And then digital dice is something that is very close and that we're really excited to introduce to the community. I've been using them for a little while and I just really do love them at this point. So I hate to be a tease, but that will be in subscriber hands pretty soon as well. And then we do have quarantine resources that we're working on. So we've got a page that is dndbeyond.com/quarantine that you can go to. You'll see some free adventure content out there that we're putting up periodically. We have a few more that we're going to do that we know about. We've, of course, increased the campaign content sharing limit from 3 campaigns to 5 campaigns during all of this, where you can hopefully get some other games started. So we are really trying to support the community during this unprecedented crisis in the world, and hopefully looking for the silver lining and being able to play some games with one another while all this is going on. upcoming. So Digital Dice, we've got a lot of plans for Digital Dice after the alpha. Lots and lots of exciting things going on there. I'm seeing some of the early stages of it now, and can't wait to let you see that as well. General feature system, we've talked about this. This is something that's going to allow us to, in addition to the framework changes that are going into place, which Dave is actually going to go into more detail about what that's doing for us later. But in addition to those framework changes, this is a system that will allow us hopefully to cover some of the gaps as these new rules are coming into place at a pretty rapid pace here with as new books are coming out for D&D. So this is something that has been really important and something that we're starting to conceptualize. Mythic Odysseys of Theros is coming June the 2nd. Cannot wait for that one as well. And I'm actually going to just real quick see if so Lauren, do we have any other news yet that has possibly dropped from possible other parties today? I'm looking at Slack, not posted yet, so I can't quite talk about it. We'll come back to it a little bit later. So sorry again to be a tease, but we don't get to go first on this one. But I will come back to it as soon as I get that message that we're clear to do so. New stream shows on Twitch. We talked about these in depth last week, but we've got Builds Character where Todd and guests go through and build characters. Todd loves to build characters. He is constantly pinging me and posting about some character concept that he's coming up with, and so he is just completely eaten up with it. And this is a perfect outlet for him to be able to talk through all his concepts and, with guests. And if you're in the same boat and you want to just kind of obsessively create all the characters in the world, this is a perfect show for you to tune into. We've got Silver and Steel, which is a new show that started this week. So if you didn't get to catch that, you can catch it on the VOD. And then tonight, or this afternoon, or possibly tomorrow, depending on where you are in the world, we do have Roll in the Family, the Slumbering Forest that is coming. We're really excited about this. You're seeing the character art here for the first time, and this is going to be a family-friendly show that is going to be essentially a new type of fairy tale. We've got DM Brennan Lee Mulligan, who is going to be leading myself and Kelly Knox, who is a freelancer for several major outlets out there, freelance writer, and then B. Dave Walters, you all know who he is. And our kids are going to actually be joining us for this stream tonight and this afternoon. So definitely tune in for this. It's going to be a great way to possibly introduce your kids to playing D&D, because this is going to be one of the first times that they're going to see other kids out there playing on a stream. So it's going to be a lot of fun. If you're wondering, I am playing the portly fawn or satyr there. So that's my character Barnaby, and we'll let all of the other cast members introduce their characters when we get into the show tonight. But looking forward to that as well. And we are now formally into Tech Talk. So Dave, I'm going to let you take it away. The stage is yours.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. Thank everybody for joining us today. I've heard that there's been some interest in doing some more technical deep dives about how we've built DDB and where we see ourselves going in the future. So the first slide that I kind of want to go over, kind of cover the historical context of how we started, where we were at when we started, and what we've done over the past couple of years based on the success and the growth that we've had to try to get ourselves in a better position for going forward in the future. So we started writing code for what was originally known, I think we've talked about this before, as Tabletop Hero in the summer, I think late summer of 2016. At that time, we were still Curse. We had not even been acquired by Twitch at that point, AKA Amazon. And we were still operating in our own data center in Atlanta. We had a very limited tech stack that we had available to us to work with. And what we started out with was a homegrown monolithic tech stack that was originally engineered in 2008 that Curse used primarily to rapidly spin up websites that had CMS and forum, user authentication, and that kind of functionality. And we knew that's what we were going to need for DDB as well, in addition to all the game data, and pretty much all we had available to us at the time. So that's what we started writing DDB with. We weren't even in AWS at that point, again, so we were in our own data center, didn't have a lot of the newer tools and the newer technologies available to us. Fast forward 2017, we launched the site August 15th, 2017. I'll never forget that day, as long as I live. Me
either.
Yeah, yeah. I remember we had a whiteboard in our area, and we were kind of spitballing. Okay, how do we think we're going to do on launch day, right? And me, the eternal pessimist, just really lowballed it. In fact, I think I won't say any numbers here, but I think that the goal we had set for ourselves from August 15th to the end of the year, we hit on day one.
Yes, we did.
That was an eye opener for sure.
Well, I've got a story here, so I'm going to just very briefly share. So our president at the time of Curse, I remember that I think I was the closest on the whiteboard because I had like Price is Right. I had the highest, so I guessed the highest, but it was still way under what we made on that first day. And I remember going into the president's office, and he was. Because this was something that we had to really internally sell, right, to our executives to get them to understand how big Dungeons and Dragons was becoming and everything else. And he came in and he was essentially like, yeah, like this is doing, I won't share any numbers, but he's like, this is doing pretty well, like I'm excited, but I wouldn't say that it would do, that this is just doing really great unless we hit X today. And this was like, at the time, X, what he threw out there was like an absurd number that no one thought we were going to hit. And so then we just kept going through the day, and we kept seeing more and more engagement. We kept seeing that number go up in sales. And actually, before the end of that day, we hit that number that he had thrown out. And so I got to take just the slightest bit of a victory lap that next day when I walked into his office. I was like, well, do you think this is going to be a big deal yet? And he was like, yeah, Adam, it might be a big deal. So I'm glad we're doing it. And so he finally like admitted that after that. But he was like, at the time, it felt like he was just throwing out a gauntlet number that no one would ever hit. But yeah, overwhelming response. And of course, we've come a long way since then. And we owe it all to you. And we definitely, segueing back to Dave here, we owe it to the technology that it hasn't, the train engine hasn't completely derailed off the tracks yet with this many users and this much growth.
Yeah, we got, so we get through 2017, we're ramping up, we're scaling. At that point, the legacy tech stack, it's, for those of you that understand, it can scale vertically, but does not scale horizontally, meaning it's very difficult for us to scale outward by just adding a bunch of additional nodes. And that's due to some limitations in its underlying architecture. It is .NET based. We have upgraded the framework to 4.61. It has a custom ORM that is pretty tightly integrated with SQL Server. And for the early days of Curse, that worked fine because Curse being a small business, we were on the BizSpark program, and we got significant discounts on our licensing costs for SQL Server. Once we were acquired by Twitch, that all went away. So we were now having to pay full price for SQL Server, still are. It's relatively expensive to run compared to other open source relational database systems like MySQL or Postgres. So that's kind of our existing stack. And 2018 hits, we land the Critical Role sponsorship. We see another large increase in growth from that, and we're scaling again. And
hockey stick.
And it became apparent, probably spring of 2018 into early summer, that this tech stack was just not going to be able to handle the kind of scaling that we were going to need based on our newer projections for growth. D&D in of itself, it was 5th edition was extremely popular. A lot of that has been elevated even by the success of Critical Role and other streams. And there's just, it's much more part of the popular culture now. And there's just a lot more people interested in D&D and playing D&D. And we're a part of that. And we're a part of that growth. And we realized that we were going to have to migrate away from this monolithic structure into what we call deconstructing the monolith, into a microservice-based architecture. This is where you take areas of your code that are in this monolith and you break them out into smaller discrete packages that engineers can work on, and they can isolate the code and usually also isolate the data that service is working with. And they can be engineered separately from the rest of the ecosystem. They can be deployed separately from the rest of the ecosystem. Right now, our current legacy stack, it takes 18 minutes to build and 45 minutes to deploy. And anybody who's working on more modern enterprise level systems knows that is just a pain. It is an absolute pain. Our newer microservices build in a minute or two and deploy in less than 5. So it's a much more user or engineer friendly environment. It lets us maintain a much more rapid pace of development and immediate feedback, and gets us much closer to a continuous integration and continuous deployment scenario than the framework. So there's a multitude of reasons why we're having to break this thing down. One, we need to be able to scale. Two, SQL Server is just way too expensive for us. And we also need a good story for geo-replication as well. As our footprint continues to grow through the D&D community, that's globally, that's not just in the United States. And we need to get to a point to where we can serve our clients, in Australia, in Europe, in South America better than we can right now. And a lot of that's going to be by us being able to replicate data and replicate some of our code in AWS data centers that are closer to those users. So that's kind of why we started where we did, what our current tech stack kind of looks like for the legacy system. And we have already started the process, and this is when Adam talks about, the new character framework. That's part of this process. So early 2019, we started by building a distributed authentication service. So we pulled authentication out of the legacy stacks for its primary responsibility. We also built an entitlement service, and this is so that these new apps that are coming online outside of the framework know who you are and know what you should have access to, either through your purchases or through content that's being shared with you. The Encounter Builder was our first service for a feature built entirely outside of the monolith. So it is a .NET Core, currently 2.2 service, and it has its own data stores, currently primarily DynamoDB and Elasticsearch. And it's performing extremely well. That team can engineer on it separately from the monolith and iterate on it at their own pace and not be worried about being tied into this old code base. The character service, which we also started last year, is migrating all of our character sheet code out of the monolith into its own service now. And that's what we're currently in the process of rolling out. It is also a .NET Core service. Currently, it is still talking to SQL Server. There is a follow-on project that hopefully users will never know it even happens, to migrate the data out of SQL Server into a different relational data store. And we've decided to keep it relational for now. We don't see a significant ROI in migrating our schema away from a relational for the character data into something more like a document store like Mongo or a NoSQL store like Dynamo, because of the additional effort it would take to also rewrite all of our code again to work with that kind of schema. And the relational data stores that we're looking at are much more scalable for us than SQL Server is, because we can more effectively set up like a write master, read slave kind of scenario to scale the database horizontally as well, not just the nodes that are running all of the code. And that's going to continue into the future. And that'll kind of segue us into the next slide, Adam, if you want to go to that one.
Here we go.
Thank you, thank you. So, so we're going from a monolith to a microservice-based architecture. And for those of you that have done this and are doing this, you know that it's not necessarily a panacea. A microservice-based architecture brings its own set of problems, but for us, scalability is the biggest problem that we need to solve. And in software architecture, you know, the first law is you never truly solving a problem. Everything's just a trade-off. So the trade-off that we're deciding on is we would rather deal with the problems a microservice-based architecture gives us than having to not be able to have the ability to scale on our current monolith. This also gives us the ability to be able to guide and incrementally evolve our architecture, because now it's broken out into separate maintainable pieces where if we have a particular service that's underperforming and needs to be rewritten in a language that is more performant than .NET, then we can do that for that one particular service. It's not an entire rewrite of our entire code base. And it kind of encapsulates that functionality away and lets teams quickly iterate on those instead of getting in these huge, long, drawn-out processes. It also gives us the ability to have better fit-for-purpose code and data. So if we do need to write a particular service in Rust for whatever reason, we could. If we need to use a NoSQL data store for that particular service, we can. It just provides a lot more flexibility than a monolith. As I've already mentioned, much better scalability in this scenario. So we can scale horizontally now using technologies such as Docker, Kubernetes. We can also have an easier path to scaling geographically throughout data centers in AWS. And we're trying to engineer these with an eye towards what does this architecture need to look like if it's 20% growth over where we are now, right? What if it's 50% growth over where we are now? And we don't want to over-engineer for sure, but we want to have an architecture where we can fine-tune and scale those pieces where it's needed. Part of the migration, which I talked about just a little bit earlier, is not just the code. It's not just pulling the code out of this monolith, but we've got to migrate all the data as well. So there will be a follow-on project to migrate just the character-specific data out of SQL Server into additional related data store. Going into next year, we'll be doing the same thing with game data, what we call game data, which are spells, monsters, magic items, feats, backgrounds, things like that. So we'll be actively working on pulling that out of the monolith as well. And another tenet that we want to build more into our architecture is data as an asset, right? So we have millions of people creating characters. We have over 1 million campaigns now that have been created on DDB. And there's just a lot of useful information about how people are playing the game, what an evolving meta looks like. And we're able to hit on some of that in our dev updates where Adam, shares an insight to some of that data. But we want to make sure that we're doing and treating data as a first-class citizen in this, and having an architecture where reportability and analytics are a lot easier than they are now, right? We primarily had just a SQL Server database, and we're trying to pull some data out of that into Athena, into Mode for analytics, and it's a relatively laborious process at this point. So as we're re-architecting and creating these different data stores, we also need to make sure that we are setting up a foundation for it to be reportable and have much easier analytics than we have now. Potentially where we may be going in the future, as far as the site itself, specifically with the web technology, is what's known in the industry as Jamstack, if you've heard of it. If you haven't, it's basically JavaScript, meaning some kind of client-side application. We internally use React and Redux. It could be Vue, Angular, whatever your flavor is. APIs, which is what we're currently building out with all of our microservices, and markup. So, sorry, my dog's barking. If you can hear it.
I thought that was a bird.
No, he gets a little lonely sometimes. So,
Oh, poor,
you know,
poor fella.
it's okay. He's okay.
Just let him in, Dave. You can pet and talk at the same time.
Now everybody just wants to see the dog. So
it's over with. We lost them all.
Yeah, we lost them all. So, you know, I kind of personally see that that's an evolution industry wide, and where we may eventually wind up ourselves is as we're building out these microservice APIs and we're building a lot more sophistication into our client side apps. There's really not a lot we need a web server for anymore. That's down the road. That's an eye toward the future. That may be where we're evolving to. Talk a little bit now about the character sheet service itself and the migration that we've been going through on it. It's been a relatively laborious process, and this kind of talks to my last bullet point here. D&D is complicated. If you read the rule set in its entirety, it is complicated just on paper. Trying to make that programmatic is extremely complicated on top of just the rule set itself. There are exceptions to everything, and how do you handle those exceptions? And
Dave, how many? I don't know if you know how many tables we actually have in the database at this point in time, but I know when we were starting, even that it was like some percentage more tables than any other website Curse had ever created, right?
Right. So one of the most complex websites that Curse had ever built was not Wowstead, WowDB. So yeah. When we data mined data out of World of Warcraft, and I think WowDB at its peak was running about 70 to 80 different database tables to handle all of the data that we were mining out of World of Warcraft. We currently, for DDB, just for the D&D specific data, we're over 200 tables. And we haven't built half of what we want to build, right, is the other part of that. So there are still a lot of additional features and things that we want to do that have been on our roadmap internally in our minds for quite a long time. So this, you know, once we build all that, granted, it won't be in the same database anymore. This will be spread out through different microservices and through different data stores. But it is going to be a relatively large, massive footprint of total data. It's an extremely complex schema and data model. When you take free-form text, you know, that Jeremy's written in a book, and try to turn that into some kind of programmatic structure. And then you have to do it at scale. You know, it's one thing to write a data model. It's another thing for that data model and that code to perform when there's 100,000 concurrent users. That's a different level of engineering that we have to consider when we're constructing this architecture. So the character service code itself, quite complex. The things that we have to do to calculate your character is quite complex. And we took the approach early on. So not only have we done this, have we been doing the character service code migration over the past, am I locked up?
Yeah, a little bit. You sound like Optimus. Yeah, you're back.
All right. So not only have we been converting the server-side code, we've also been updating our client-side app, which is written in Redux or React and Redux, and because we needed a way to share that logic. The server, we wanted it to be as relatively dumb as possible when it's fetching data. So the server itself is simply pulling back all of the underlying data that we need to calculate what your character is on the character sheet, right? So when the React app asks for your character information, it doesn't get back a field with armor class 18. We're not calculating that on the server. We're giving the React app all of the underlying data that it needs to calculate what your AC should be. And a couple of reasons for doing this. One, the React app needs to know that level of detail anyway, or when you're making changes on your sheet, it can apply those immediately instead of continually having to go back to the server. The sheet itself would be much slower if that was the architecture that we had originally went with. Two, we didn't want to perform all of those calculations on our servers. Instead, offloading that onto client devices, the the servers we would have had to do that for the volume that we're at now and the volume we want to go for in the future would be much more costly than what we're currently running with. And it also gives us a way to share that logic across different parts of the ecosystem, meaning we can use that same rules engine on the website. It is also being used in the new player app, right? So we can take that same React code, put it in the player app, and you can be assured that your character is getting calculated the exact same way on either platform. And there are some other uses.
And Dave, because I'm seeing it like all over chat, like presumably that would also be kind of the starting point for, you know, an API or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we'll dive into it because people are definitely asking about that.
Potentially.
Okay.
Potentially. So, right. Yeah. So, you know, that's kind of a historical context where we came from, where we are, a little bit of our vision into the future. A rundown on our current stack, the microservices that we have built so far. Is primarily .NET Core is what we're running on the server side. Any of our front end code is React Redux, and we are. I think everything has been converted to TypeScript at this point. We may have one or two apps that hasn't been fully converted over yet, but we've pretty much standardized on TypeScript for the underlying code on the client side. We're using a multitude of data stores now, and as we're trying to get out of SQL Server, we're looking at Aurora, the MySQL variant in AWS for our relational store. We're using DynamoDB. We're using Elasticsearch. Like if you search the monster listing in the encounter builder, that's all talking to Elasticsearch at that point. That's not even talking to DynamoDB because we can denormalize the structure a little bit more and present a better search footprint for that subset of data. We are using DynamoDB. We're using Redis when we need to for any kind of key value lookup that we're not wanting to do in Dynamo. Trying to think, that's the majority of our footprint right now. We are using Docker ECS for all of our new microservices with a plan to migrate to Kubernetes probably within the next 9 to 12 months as well. Pain points of that architecture has been the local developer experience for sure. It was a lot easier to do local development on your machine with a monolith. You got one code base, you got one database that you restore locally on your desktop, and you're good to go. Microservice architecture presents a lot more problems to solve for a local dev in that architecture. But like I mentioned earlier, you know, everything in architecture is a trade-off. Scalability obviously was a bigger and is a bigger concern for us with our growth. So these are the pain points that we're having to take on and work our way through. I guess that's about it. Quick rundown of where we are. If we want to like open that into questions, I'm sure there's probably some specifics that have come up through that talk that people want to get into.
Yeah, we could definitely open it up for questions. First of all, Dave, I really appreciate you doing this. I have been monitoring chat because I couldn't just stare into the camera, you know, lovingly at everyone while you're talking there. But looking in chat, and it looks like people are really appreciating the overview that you gave. Another question I see popping up is, are we hiring? And actually, I do want to call out a very specific role right now that we have. We had one of our team members from the very beginning of
Mm.
DDB has actually moved on to a new job. We're very, very happy for him moving on. But we do have a front end engineering role that is open on that team right now. Lauren, I think that you have the link, the direct link to that. So if you're a front end engineer, we are looking for someone right now. There's a job opening for a front end engineer to backfill that position. So if that's you, definitely apply. We look forward to seeing all the applications that'll happen here.